Hello everyone. In today's video, I will be chatting with Betty, a biomedical scientist from Australia who now works in the UK. This will be somewhat like one of the previous videos that I made about the international route to HCPC registration. Betty, thank you very much for joining this evening. I hope you've had your dinner.
I haven't, but thank you for having me, Anis. I'm very excited to be here. I really love the work that you're doing here. I'm someone that goes to the internet to see how other people have seen, how other people have done things. So I'm really excited to contribute to that.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I guess my first question for you, or maybe two, is what are you currently doing in a professional sense, and when did you come to the UK?
So I've been in the UK for about 9 months now. I came last May, and I'm working in a multidisciplinary lab in central London. So yeah, it's hematology, biochemistry, transfusion, coagulation, and yeah, I've been doing that since last May in the UK.
Sure. So I guess you came here in the summer when it was winter over in Australia. How did you adjust to that change, or was there much difference between the two?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually quite intentional about coming over during the summer over here because everyone had told me how dark and cold and grey the winters are here, and how you leave for work in the dark and you come home in the dark. So I wanted to make sure I made the experience as comfortable for me. And yeah, the summertime here is honestly so beautiful. And yeah, the winter has been a bit rough, but to be honest, I've been at work most of the time. So
So you haven't seen the dark, to be honest, because like you
no, not
said,
really.
okay, so I want to get the timeline straight in my head a little bit, and we'll come on to the actual HCPC registration and the application shortly. But first, I want to understand what your thought process was. So let's imagine it's the last day of uni and you've just finished your degree. What degree did you study, and what did you do straight after?
So I studied a bachelor's in medical laboratory science. So it was very much geared towards working in a laboratory as a scientist or a biomedical scientist, as you guys call it here. But while I was studying, actually, I worked as a histology technician, which I think is like an assistant or like laboratory assistant here. That's like the equivalent of it. There was a girl in my met her in my one of my microbiology modules or courses, and she worked in a histo lab at the time, and I just wanted to get my foot in the door. I just knew how important that was, whether that was just doing specimen reception or just doing admin work in the lab. I just wanted to get in the door. So I got that job in my second year of university. So for my degree was 4 years. So yeah, the last 2 years of uni, I was working full time in a histology lab. So I'd go to work from 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. and then I'd go to university from 10 till 5. Then I'd come home, study, and I just repeated that for 2 years. But I just knew the experience in the lab was going to be so valuable, and I just wanted to get in the lab. So yeah, that was the degree that I did, and I think the particular one that I did, I think it's quite unique in our state because all the other courses available, even like within, I think Australia, they're very much generic science courses as opposed to specifically gearing you towards working as a lab scientist. So yeah, once I finished my degree, I actually had applied for jobs before I even graduated because I knew that there was new graduate roles that were becoming available usually at the end of the year. A lot of the labs are looking for new grads. So I was just applying, and yeah, I luckily landed a job before I finished my degree. And once I did finish my degree, I just went straight into work.
Okay, so it sounds like you are a bit of a planner because you had the foresight to start working and getting experience while you were still studying. So my question here is the degree in Australia, do you do a sandwich year type course where you actually have a lab placement, or did you do the experience because there was no availability to work in the lab as part of a placement?
So the placement is a mandatory part of I guess, the accreditation of your course by the like accreditation body of Australia. It's called the Australian Institute of Biomedical Scientists, which is like your IBMS here. And I think I personally just wanted to get the experience because you do have to do the internship, and I think they also make you do that so that they're not releasing new grads with no actual real life hands-on experience in the lab. And you do that in your final year of university. The final year was a lot of a lot of internship, which if you haven't worked in a lab before, you have to do 12 weeks of unpaid work in a lab. So it's full time, Monday to Friday. I think you got half. I think you got half a day every second week as like a study day because you had to complete modules and like write essays and everything that you were doing and learning in the lab. But if you did have previous work experience, and you got you got that shortened to 8 weeks, which was great because I didn't really want to be working for free for an extra month. So yeah, that's what I did.
So you said when you were working in the lab, in that histology lab, you're working as an assistant. So what are the professionals called? Are they biomedical scientists in the UK, or is there a different term for the professionals?
So I was working as a medical technician because I didn't have a TAFE degree, or I think it's like a similar a diploma, which is what some people have when they have that role. But then they have scientists, which are the ones that have finished. They've got a bachelor's. They've done the university
Right.
studies.
Okay, so you're a technician, and then when you get your registration, as it were, you become a scientist.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So when did you decide that actually you want to come to the UK?
Um, I think I decided about 3 years ago. I was doing a Kentucky or a top deck tour back in 2019, and I was in London for a few days, and I just loved it. And I decided that I want to come back. It's very easy if you're if you're an Australian citizen, on an Australian passport, to come over here. You can go get on a youth mobility visa. I think it works both ways, but if you're between the ages of 18 and 30, you can live and work in the UK for 2 to 3 years. I think it's 2 years at the moment, but they've just extended to 3 years. So that's the visa I'm on currently. I think later I may decide to go on a work visa to see how it goes. But yeah, so about 3 years ago, but I wanted to make sure I finished my studies, got some work experience. So I had worked in a lab for about a year by the time I decided to come over because I didn't want to be a new grad in a new country and not have things work out. So I wanted the experience, and I also thought that would make me more employable if I had work experience before I came here. So
Sure. And I guess, like you said, you had the work experience while you're working the nights in between uni. I don't know how you managed to do that. Working at night, waking up, going to uni, then studying, then repeating the whole process. And then you also had a year, you said, in between graduation and then coming to the UK.
yeah, so I graduated end of 2021, I think. Yeah, so then I worked until the end of 2022, and then May 2023 is when I decided to come over here.
Sure. I remember we spoke previously when organizing this discussion, and you told me that you're a bit of a planner. You had everything planned and sorted out before you came to the UK. So there's a few things involved here. First of all, it's getting the registration with the Health and Care Professionals Council, or the HCPC, the visa, and also the job. So what did you do first, and how did that go?
The first thing, I think I applied for my visa because I figured if I don't have a visa, I can't really get a job or anything like that. So that was a pretty straightforward process. It took well, the estimate, I think, was about 6 months. That was what they had on their website for how long it would take. So I started that around, I think, September, with the intention to travel in May. And I mean, it happened all very quickly, actually. It was all done within 6 weeks. And yeah, that was a very expensive process, to be honest. I think the visa itself, there's an application fee, which I think was around like £150 or about 300 Australian dollars. And then in the UK as well, you have to pay the I think it's the healthcare surcharge, or there's some sort of healthcare, I think national insurance or something, and that's like £700, and you can't get your visa unless you pay all these things. The other requirement was that you had to have a minimum of, I think, like £1,300 in your bank account for them to approve your visa. So you had to provide documentation of all these things before they would give you your visa. So yeah, I just did most things online. Everything's very accessible. You just provide all your documents online. I did have to go to the UK embassy in Brisbane, which is the city I'm from, and I think they check all your documentation in person, and then yeah, you submit everything, come back in a few weeks, and then pick up your visa.
So the visa that you're speaking about, that was the youth mobility visa, right? So
Yes.
why, just out of curiosity, why did you not try and find sponsored jobs? Because you can get a sponsorship visa as well.
Yeah, I figured that I could always do the sponsorship visa later on, whereas this particular visa, it allows you to live and work in the UK for 2 years if you're between 18 and 30, and it's a once in a lifetime or once in that time period thing. So I might as well use that than go onto a work visa later on, because I've also thought the sponsorship process might be a bit more difficult, whereas this was something readily available that there wasn't really any hoops I had to jump over to get it.
Sure. I guess as long as you had the funds, like you said, and you were able to pay the healthcare surcharge and the actual visa application fee, that was it. There wasn't really anything else that you had to prove or do.
Exactly, because I think if you would, I haven't looked into the sponsorship visa, but I would imagine you would have to be in contact with the workplace and get them to be on board with you coming over and all the stuff. And I didn't know anyone when I moved over here. I didn't have any contacts of like companies or anything like that, so it was just too much to do.
Sure, sure. So you applied for the visa first, and you said you started that process in September, and that took about 6 months, or was it 6 weeks? Sorry.
They estimated 6 months, so that's why I started so early, but it took 6 weeks.
Okay, that's quite quick. That's a very quick turnaround time. So then, when did you start applying for your HCPC registration?
So that was next on my list because I didn't want to come over here and be trying to sort all that stuff out while I was in a country that where I didn't know anyone. So yeah, I started that straight afterwards in November, and something that was very helpful to me was joining a Facebook group. And like I said before, I always just look to the internet when I'm trying to do something, see how other people have done things before. And I joined a Facebook group called HCPC Registration, and it was just yeah, you just apply, ask to join the Facebook group, and they get you to answer a few questions, and then you enter it into it, and it's just everyone sharing their resources for how they did things, or if they've got questions on how to answer certain questions, or how they should lay out their application. So I joined that, and a lot of the time frames for people getting their registrations were like 4 months or 8 months or something like that. And so yeah, I started like stressing at that point. I was like, this can't take 8 months, because I want to book my flights, but I don't want to book my flights until I've got my registration, because I don't want to be going over there or going to the UK when I don't have confirmation of work. Because I really didn't want to. Of course, I could do like casual work, but one, I didn't want to lose that time period of not actually being in the lab, losing my skills. When you got like time away, you forget things. So I didn't want to be out of work for a long time. And obviously, like being a new grad, I just didn't want to have big gaps between my practice. So he started that in November. And then that also took about, I think I did it actually, yeah, November, December, just around Christmas time. And they keep you updated as your application is received, and then they'll tell you it's with the assessors now. Um, and then that, I think in itself, it probably would have taken like 3 or 4 weeks, but my manager was they need a contact from your workplace, or they need a contact to confirm your experience or just what you have submitted in your application. And at the time, my supervisor was on holiday, so he hadn't responded to the email that they'd sent him for a few weeks. But then early January, they confirmed that I'd been registered.
Sure. So, in terms of the application itself, what was required? And when you did your application, was it the online version or was it still the paper-based version?
I think I saw a few notes for a post version, which I was like, I'm not going to the post office. That's just too much work. Let me just do it all online. So yeah, I was very adamant about just finding the most convenient way to do it. So I did it via the post. And I think the most arduous thing that I remember about the application was having to go through my university course and figure out all the modules that I took all the way from first year, semester one, all the different classes, what the unit was, what my contact hours were, how many hours of lectures, how many hours of practicals, what type of the assessment, was it written, was it practical, was it verbal? Um, and I compiled this Word document, which ended up being 38 pages, I think, because you have to go through each of your modules and, yeah, write out what the assessment was. So I think we were doing like 4 subjects per semester. So it was like 8 subjects per year. So it was like 16 different units that I had to do that for. So once I did that, I did this over, I think, a few weeks, just to not overwhelm myself. Once I did that, that had to be certified. So I had to send that across to the university for them to approve that everything that I'd written was correct. I had to have the university seal on it. The other thing was work experience. If you had any work experience, you had to write that down. And I think that's what I use to demonstrate how I met the standards of proficiency, because that's what you're trying to do with HCPC, is show that you have the skills and the knowledge to be on the registration board. So with my work experience, once I had graduated, the lab I was working in was multidisciplinary. Wow, it does not roll off the tongue. Lab, and so I did same things: hematology, chemistry, for blood transfusion. So I went through each of those and basically went looked at all the different standards from the HCPC website, and just demonstrated how in transfusion I was able to adhere to quality standards and what that meant. And yeah, so that was another part of it. And then the other part was just getting a reference from my work manager. I think you could also get your university lecturer or someone that you'd work with to just give you a reference. And yeah, and then everything had to be certified. So we call them Justice of the Peace in Australia. So I just went to a local library and got someone to look over my passport, my university degree, and just everything, and sign it over, because the HCPC needs that. HCPC needs everything to be certified in order to approve the application.
Sure. So going back to you writing that extra long novel about what you studied at university, how did you send it to the university and how did they send it back? Because you said you made it on a Word document, is that correct?
Yes. So on the HCPC website, they actually have a template for how they want it to be laid out. So I think it's on the left hand side, it starts off with year, and then it's what course you did, what the course content was, and then I think the last two columns were the mode of assessment: was it verbal, written, and then was it completed at this university degree? So at this university. So then I just pretty much fill that out for each unit that I undertook, and I just went to my university's website, because I think at this point, yeah, it had been a year since I'd graduated. So I just went to the university website, and luckily they keep a record of each. It's freely accessible, because I didn't obviously have my student access anymore. But you can just go see what course they have and who the lecturer was at that time, what the mode of assessment was. I just copy and paste it from the university website. And then I just compiled that into a Word document, found the contact or the administration contact from the university, sent it to them, and just explained I'm trying to get my registration in the UK. They the accrediting body that gives me a license needs to have proof that I undertook these courses, and it needs to have the university seal. So I sent that to them, and there was a bit of back and forth because my course coordinator wasn't working at the time or something. I was a bit worried because I didn't know if they were going to approve it because they needed him, I think, to confirm it before they could put the seal on it. So yeah, there was a bit of uncertainty with that, but yeah, other than that, they once that got approved, they just sent it back, and yeah.
I guess one of the changes that must have happened after you did this part of the process is that last year the HCPC released a course information form, which is a form that you just fill in, and it requires all the information that you've just mentioned. So rather than you having to compile it yourself in a Word document, it's in a form format. And so, it asks you for the name of your institution, the address, when you studied there, and then it gives you different sections to fill in, which I guess makes it easier for the applicants rather than them
Oh
having
wow.
to do it themselves. So that came out last year in the summer, and I'll post a link to that below. So for people that are watching this online can have access to that. I think the HCPC website is quite beneficial as well. There's quite a lot of information on there too about the application process. You've mentioned you spoke to a university, you got their seal of approval. Once your lecturer or your course organizer came back from the extra long 3-week holiday. I mean, who gets 3 weeks holiday these days?
Yeah.
It's hard enough to get a week. I guess maybe it was holidays, and so they didn't have much work going on at the time. And then there's also the section on your personal details, and that's very important too, I think, because it's very easy when you're typing quickly to make mistakes, right? Especially when it comes to email addresses, the number of times people type, a comma instead of a full stop in an email address, and especially when you're from a different country and you're applying to the HCPC, their main method of contacting you is probably via email. I don't think they would ever phone anyone. I might be wrong. I think email's the easiest, and that's where you probably receive your notifications that you mentioned earlier about your application. They've passed the book to the next person to have a look at, etc. And that notification comes via email. Is that correct?
Yes, most of my notifications are by email,
Sure.
if I can recall.
So I guess it's very, very important that that section is also filled in properly, and people take care when doing it. It's very easy to make mistakes, and it's a costly mistake as well, and it will delay the application too. So apart from the course information and your personal details, were there any other sections that you had to fill in?
Um, I'm trying to recall. Nothing. Nothing off the top of my head, but just with the contact. I think there was. I think I had to put my mobile number in there because I only registered for 1 year, and just recently, I had to re-register while I've been here for another year. Because I got my registration in November, so that's past now. And when I went to go do it, the for me to access my HCPC account, I had to put in my mobile number, and I'd completely forgotten that I'd put my mobile number in, and put my mobile number in. And since being over here, obviously I've got a UK number now, so I had to put my Australian SIM back in to get the verification code, then go back to HCPC website, and then change my contact details to my new UK number so that when I want to log in and change my details, I don't have to use my Australian SIM anymore.
So I guess the takeaway from this is don't throw away your SIM when you get on the aeroplane. Keep it with
No,
you.
yes, exactly.
Sure. So how long did it take for your application to get approved?
Um, so I would say all in all, probably about 4 weeks. But they did get back to me, which I know is very, very quick because, like I said in that Facebook group, people were telling me it's taking them 8 months, 4 months, 6 months. So I don't know like why, but yeah, it got approved very quickly. But there was a bit in there where they said there was missing documentation, and they sent me an email saying, "Can you send us your university degree?" And there was something else, and I was like, "I'm pretty sure I put all this information in already when I applied the first time, but I just replied back to that email and just attached it as a document." So I don't know if there was just like a glitch from their end, and I also remember it being really difficult to attach the course information, which I know is redundant now because they've got a new way to do it. But that really big file, it was too big to upload. So I remember having to do it in two separate files.
Sure. So you mentioned a few times this Facebook group and the secret society. If you could share the link with us, I think other people might find it useful as well to get some information if they're looking to apply. And I'll share that link in the description once I get it from you.
Yes, no worries.
Thank you. One of the important things that we haven't yet mentioned is money. And everything costs. Nothing comes free in life, unfortunately, no matter how much we wish it would. And even, you said your visa cost some money. There was the NHS surcharge you had to pay. And then for the HCPC application itself, how much was that?
Yes, it was a very expensive process, this whole thing. Like you said, I wish it was free. Um, so I think there's a scrutiny fee, which I believe it was, I think, like £80, and that's for them just to like assess your application. And then there's a fee for just a registration, which for a year I think is £116. So I think those were the only fees I can recall. And then yeah, I just had to pay again my registration fee, which was 295 something pounds per year. But luckily, I can claim that from my workplace now as part of my yeah.
Sure. You must have had it lucky because the scrutiny fee now, if you look at the website today, it's about £640. So
What?
you paying £80, you got a bargain. And I guess you got in there before they raised all the fees. The other thing that you mentioned was the actual registration fee. So scrutiny fee is just for them to look at your application. And then once you become registered, to stay in the register, you have to pay the registration fee. And the HCPC operate a 2-year cycle. So I guess because you missed the first year, you only paid for the second year. And that was 119 or so pounds. And then for both years, it's about 200 and something.
Yeah, that makes sense now because everyone at work had to pay the registration, and I was like, I only want to pay for a year, and everyone's like, no, you have to pay for 2 years. I was like, well, what do you mean? What if I don't want to be here in 2 years? They're like, no, now you say that it works in 2 year cycles. It makes sense, huh?
Yeah. So you said you got your application back from the HCPC relatively quickly compared to, what the current turnaround times are. When did you start looking for jobs?
So once I got my registration, I think within a couple of days after that, I started looking for jobs. I didn't want to mess around. So I wanted to use that as leverage because I knew no one would really look at me without my HCPC. Like you can't practice as a BMS. So there was no point in me not having that and looking for jobs.
Sure. And you're right. I think without the HCPC registration, you cannot apply to be a biomedical scientist. It's one of the first things they ask on the application form as well. Do you have appropriate registration to practice? And if you tick no, the application form doesn't let you proceed anyway. So it's good that you got the registration and then you started applying for jobs. Where were you looking for these jobs?
Um, the first place was just on Indeed and in Seek. And then I looked on the NHS websites, but I couldn't really, I found it difficult to navigate the NHS website. I worked for a private company in Australia, private pathology company, and they're over here as well. So I love my company in Australia, and I did want to stay with them. That was important to me. So I also just had a look on their website, see if there were any vacancies, and there were. So originally, actually, I was going to go with an agency, do locum work, and I did start that process. But at the same time, I was looking for. I think halfway through that, I decided I want a more permanent role, but I wasn't too sure. So I just had both going, and I started contacting. There were email addresses at the bottom of the vacancies that I was seeing, so I just sent my resume with my reference, a professional reference, to those emails directly, just expressing my interest. And this was in, I think, February, January. I was starting to send out these emails, and I wasn't moving over till May, but I just figured you never know, like there might be people leaving in May, so I might as well just put it out there for any future positions that they might have available. And yeah. Sorry, I think the audio is just gone.
I pressed the mute button on my mic.
Oh,
So you've mentioned May a few times now. So had you already thought that May is the day I'm going to buy the tickets, or I'm going to fly out in May, or was it a case of I'll see, in terms of jobs, whether I've got a job lined up, and then if everything is in place, then I'll fly out in May.
I think I'm trying to remember. I think I might have like as soon as I think I got my registration, I might have already bought my tickets, and so I just figured after that I'll figure it out. As long as I've got my visa, my registration, um, I'll figure it out after that. But obviously, ideally, I would have preferred to have it all secure um, before then. So yeah, 1st of May was just when I decided I wanted to arrive.
Makes sense. So you've started applying for jobs, and this is now a year ago. You said January, February last year. Where we are now, can you believe it? It's February already. We're halfway
Yeah.
through.
Oh my gosh.
Um, so how much luck did you have with applying for those jobs? Did you get called for interviews? What was the feedback like if you did have any interviews? And when did you land that first job?
So that was pretty positive. I think I applied for three or probably like five actually. I think it was five jobs that I applied that I'd sent emails to directly. And I heard back from three. One, I think one wanted to just do not an interview as such. It was more just I wasn't sure actually. I didn't end up going to that one because I had another interview. And I was doing these interviews. I think it was like 9 p.m. at night Australian time because that was 10 a.m. UK time or something like that. So that was a bit hard because I'd come home after a long day. Then I'd be sitting at home at 9 p.m. doing a job interview like over Zoom. And so yeah, that was pretty positive with those responses. Um, and yeah, it's very straightforward. They would just say, okay, yeah, we like your application. Are you available for a Zoom meeting? And they would just send it to my email, schedule it, a Teams meeting, schedule it, and you just jump on. And yeah, it's just like this.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds quite straightforward because I remember when I first applied for jobs, it took me 150 applications before I got my first job. And here you are, five applications in, and you've already got a job. That's amazing. You must have some magic tricks which you must share with us. So I guess my next question was going to be, you said you didn't apply to the job on the actual website. You just sent them your resume. Is that correct? And did you write a cover?
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a good point because there was an option to apply through the website, but I just saw the contact email and I just didn't want to mess around. I was like, well, this is where I'm going to be seen. Um, I want them to look at my resume. I'm sure they're getting hundreds of applications through the application portal. And yes, I just sent the email directly to the managers, and that's how I got responses. So yeah, I just think would always just encourage like if you want something to just put yourself out there because and you know what my headspace going into that first interview as well because I had never interviewed with anyone in the UK so I didn't know how the interviews would run. Like in Australia, I'd done so many interviews because once I left my histo job, I ended up working in a couple of hospitals. So I kind of had a good idea of what sort of questions get asked in interviews, for SRAs, MLAs, for technicians. And I just thought with the first interview, if it goes really bad, it's fine. I've got a couple more. I just wanted to use that particular one to gauge how the interview process would go. And it was very different actually from what the interviews are like in Australia because I would say like in Australia the questions that you get asked are 50-50 personality to technical questions. I don't think I got asked a single technical personality question for my UK one. It was all very technical in the lab. What would you do if you had a lymphocyte count of this or a hemoglobin of this or someone's had a reaction? That were all the questions and yeah. So I was very shocked because I had also prepared for personality questions, how you would handle like I guess like disagreements in the workplace and things like that. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah. I think the more senior you go, the more it becomes about what you know, and I noticed the same as well. So when you apply for MLA jobs here, they ask you these personality questions. It's a lot more about what would you do in this situation, what would you do if the QCs failed, or what would you do if you saw. I remember I went to an interview in Norwich or Cambridge, I can't remember, somewhere far away from where I live, and they asked me, "What would you do if you see a colleague crying?" I'm like, I've come for a science lab role. What's this got to do with anything?" I'd offer them some tissues, see if they're okay. I had no idea. It threw me completely. But then, as I progressed in my career and I reached, working as a biomedical scientist, the question changed completely. It was less about what would you do in this situation. It was more about, the technical stuff, like you mentioned. You get a low platelet count. What would you do? What is a high lymphocyte count indicative of? And I only worked in hematology transfusion, so I didn't get any of the difficult biochemistry questions. So I'm grateful for that. So it's all more technical.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. You have a lot more responsibilities as you become more senior. So it's important that as the person of contact that people go to, that you know what you're talking about.
Of course, of course. I still think that personality questions are still important because you can learn a lot about a person anyway. But I guess each company does it differently. The company that you applied for, if this was the same one in Australia, maybe they've got different questions that they ask than other companies. Maybe NHS does it differently. There might be slight variations, but I think generally speaking, it is more technical the more higher up you go.
I think it's interesting because in coming to the UK, it was like there was a big culture shock, which I wasn't anticipating. But it's been great. Like London specifically is just a big melting pot. Like you work with people from all over the world, which I hadn't really experienced before in Australia. So I've had to learn really how to communicate with people from different backgrounds in a way that I haven't had to before. So I would think that the personality questions are very important because someone in the workplace will say something and you might take it one way, but because of your different backgrounds, your different attitudes, and your different life experiences, they've meant it a completely different way. And yeah, like honestly, like on a day-to-day basis, from the nurses, the collectors, the couriers, and just your general lab team, everyone is not from like London as such. So it's so like important to be able to learn how to work in that environment. And I've had to really like and be intentional in thinking about how I deal with my coworkers.
Yep. And like you mentioned, London is a very diverse and a multi-ethnic society as well. So you've got people from all over the world living in London, and whether it's from Asia, Africa, America, you name it, there's people from there in this country, and well, more importantly, in London. And one of the things that I think I've noticed working with other people as well is that people respond to things differently too. Like you mentioned, you made a fantastic point, but everyone has different backgrounds and cultures and also, life experiences. And the way I may react to a situation will be based on my experience, my knowledge, my background, my culture, my religion, my whatever you want to call it. But somebody else may be completely different. And I remember when I first started working in the lab, there was one colleague I had who came across as very, very rude. I just didn't understand why. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but every time they spoke to me, I would think it was just so rude. And it was only a few months down the line that I realized they weren't actually being rude. It was just because of their accent and where they were from, it came across as rude to me as a South Londoner. But that was just how they were. They were actually a lovely person. And it just took me a little bit of time just to realize that. And once I did, it's very important that you do realize that there are differences. And having those differences and being exposed to them makes you a better person.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely agree with you.
Yep. And
Yeah.
I think I've used this quote so many times. I was doing a recording with somebody yesterday, and I used this quote too, that you only grow when you step outside your comfort zone. And
Yes.
like you mentioned, back in Brisbane, you may not have had that same exposure to so many different people from different backgrounds, but in London you do. And
Yeah.
that culture shock, which you described, has allowed you to grow.
Yeah. No, that's one thing since being over here. My personal development has just skyrocketed because you're just forced to do things that you're not you're not in your normal environment. So you have to become this other person. You have to put yourself out there. You have to approach people that you otherwise wouldn't approach. So yeah, yeah, definitely.
We've skipped a few steps in your timeline. So at the moment you were applying for jobs, and this was back in January, February last year, you said. So when did you get the job that you are now currently in, if this is your first job in the UK?
Yes, so I'm still in my first job, and I think I heard back from them probably the next week or so. And once I had heard back, I cancelled my other interviews because I was very certain about this position. I wanted to be in central London because I'm in my mid 20s, and the other two jobs were in North London and a bit further out, and I just was not interested in being further out. I want to be where everything is happening. So this job really, yeah, it worked out very well for me. And I heard back the next week, but it was actually, I completely forgot about this bit, but I actually couldn't sign a job contract until I got here. So that was nerve wracking because without a job contract, I couldn't sign a lease agreement. So there were so many things where I just had the word of the manager, the person I'd interviewed with, that I had got the job, but I couldn't exactly sign a contract. So I don't know, I kind of had to plan for it all to go sideways, but then also hope that he would stick to his word until I got arrived here, and I could sign the contract.
Sure, there's a lot of things which are interdependent on each other. And like you mentioned, without having the contract, it's hard to sign the lease agreement. And if this was back in February, you still had 3 months till you came to the UK, right? Because you decided you were going to come on the 1st of May. Were the job willing to wait that time?
Yeah, so they knew that when I wanted to start, I was quite clear about that. And yeah, so I actually got, I think at the same time, after I got the confirmation about getting the job, I was looking for places to live, which is, it's also another kettle of fish. Um, so in order for me to get, because I couldn't provide the agencies, rental agencies, with a contract. So I got the manager to write me a letter to say she does have a job with us. It's confirmation that I will be giving her a job. So yeah, so I got him to do that. And the reason why I couldn't sign the contract was because of my visa. The way it works here is you get your visa, but then you have to pick up your it's like your UK identity card. I'm trying to think the name. Your
The
BRP, your
BRP.
biometric. Yeah. So you have to pick that up at a nominated post office in the UK. Like you have to pick it up in person. You can't get it posted. You can't get someone else to pick it up. And you have to pick it up within 10 days of your visa start date, which mine was the 1st of May. So I had to pick it up by the 10th. So once I arrived here, I think it was the next day after I had arrived, went straight to this post office in South London, picked it up, and then went straight from there, got on a bus to my workplace. Went to my workplace, they scanned all my passport, my BRP, and then I went home, and then a couple of days after that, then they sent like a DocuSign contract. So I actually didn't sign the contract for about a week until I was here.
Sure.
Yeah.
So then when you came here eventually, the 1st of May, you picked up your BRP, got all your documents checked. When did you actually start working?
2 weeks. So think I started on the 15th of May. And at that point, I think I'd resigned from my other job, and it'd been about 4 weeks. Again, really didn't want to be out of work for longer than that, which sounds crazy, but I hadn't had that much of a break between work and being a new grad as well. Like I just wanted to continue, keep up my skills, especially like my morphology skills. I just didn't want to be out of the lab. So obviously the UK is just ridiculously expensive, and the way you guys do your payments for like your rent and your salary and stuff as well, it's on a monthly basis, whereas in Australia we're used to every fortnight. So I had to plan ahead for being out of work from mid-April till the end of May, which also maybe this might not be a UK wide thing, but if you start work before like the 15th of the month, you don't get paid until like for 6 weeks or something like that. You have to start within a certain date, even with that month, to get paid at the end of the month. So that was a whole thing in itself. So definitely like the financial planning side of it is so, so important. I think I had a worst case scenario, as in if I didn't get a job, as in if that job contract that I'd been offered wasn't actually legit and that didn't work, I had given myself at least 2 months to be able to, I had like a 2 months amount of savings to get me through before I decided to call it quits.
And I guess that's also probably why when you apply for the visa, they say you have to have a minimum amount of, is it £1,300, so that if you are in a situation where the job falls through, you've got some monetary funds available to you to be able to do what you got to do. Living is expensive, especially in London, like you mentioned. Everything from food to travel to rent, everything is very, very expensive. So that is understandable. So how are you finding working in the UK compared to working in Australia, and what's the transition been like for you?
Um, I love it, honestly. The more time I spend here, the more I enjoy it. In terms of work, I think it's been quite similar. My last job was, again, it was a private company, and the lab that I worked at in particular, it was a satellite lab, and our lab had a hematology oncology outpatient clinic associated with it. So our main patient demographic were those patients. We had a few patients that we would get from like just a private hospital, a few community patients, but mainly it was it was that. So in the company I'm with now, again, it's not part of like the NHS, even though I do understand that some of your private pathology providers do the pathology service for the NHS, which is an odd concept that I haven't seen before. Because in Queensland, the public health system or the public hospitals have a public health, like they have their public pathology providers. I think there's a couple that have private ones, but mainly the private pathologies don't provide the pathology service for the public hospitals. So yeah, the lab I'm at now, it's associated with the private hospital. So the patient demographics are quite similar. Like we don't have an A&E and things like that, so we don't get to see extreme cases. Most things are planned. Obviously, like being a hospital, you can have patients who have surgeries and they hemorrhage in the middle of the night and things go randomly. But yeah, it's similar type of work. I didn't do night shift in Australia, which, I mean, in my BMS job, I didn't do night shift. Obviously, I did it as like a histo when I was working in histo. But yeah, my other lab job was only 5 a.m. to 8 p.m., which was great. But yeah, now I have to do night shifts, which yeah, that's been an adjustment. And yeah, it's all very similar, because I think generally, science is science. Like wherever you go, the principles are going to be the same. I think the processes change a little bit. Something that surprised me being over here was the analyzers that I've seen here. Obviously, I've only worked with one company. I had one job here, but the analyzers are like a lot older than what I thought that they would be. I thought coming to like the UK and especially London, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get to see some like state of the art machines. But some of them are like machines I learned on when I was at uni in 2018. I'm like, what is this doing here? So that was like a bit of a shock. Um, but yeah, otherwise, like we have to do the same things. We have EQA. You guys call it NEQAS. We call it NADA. We have the same regulatory bodies. We have to do, biochemistry EQA every 2 weeks. Everyone has to get assessed all the time. So yeah, they're quite similar.
Sure. And I guess one of the reasons the HCPC asks for your university degree and what you studied is to make sure that you're up to the standard, that you can work as a biomedical scientist here. And you mentioned science is the same no matter where you go. And because you could do it in Australia and HCPC have checked and you've got the experience to show that you can do it in Australia, it's the same cells. Humans are the same no matter where you go. We've got the same blood, we've got the same white cells and red cells, and they all go up and down in a similar sort of fashion. So I guess that transition is quite similar in that sense. But when you spoke about the analyzers, I think there's a much deeper point about how the NHS is always, because it's publicly run, from taxes, it's always so far behind, and that was one of the shocks that people used to have when they came to the hospital where I used to first work at as well. The LIMS system that we used was black and white, MS-DOS based, and it was like playing a piano. You had to know which keys to press to do, what you wanted. And people think this is a world-renowned hospital in central London, and yet the software is so bad. And but I think change is something that doesn't happen very quickly, especially in the NHS, whether it's analyzers, whether it's computer systems. And as you know, working in a hospital, there's so many different systems that communicate with each other. The system that you use in the lab is different to maybe the system that they use on the wards, which may be different to the system that the pharmacists use in their job, which may be different to the system that the imaging department use for radiology. And so because there's so many different systems, changing one is not as easy as just, getting a new one. Some of them don't communicate with each other. Some of them just don't work with legacy older systems. And the same with the analyzers. I remember using Windows XP middleware on analyzers, and it would shock me because that stopped being supported by Microsoft decades ago. We're using Windows 7, at home. Windows 10 came out, and still you'd get analyzers with Windows XP on it. And XP was one of probably my first computer I think I got. You used to run XP, and that was decades ago. So change is slow, unfortunately. I think there's also that aspect of, you can't change quickly because it may have implications for patient safety. And so that's a whole different conversation, which I don't think I want to get into today. But looking back, now you've been working here for 9 months to almost a year now. What went well? And what would you do differently? And what advice would you give to others who are looking to follow the same route that you've gone down?
Yeah, definitely the planning stage. I think the reason why I think I've had a positive experience coming over here is just that I've really planned for it. I'm not someone who deals with like uncertainty when it comes to finances and my living situation, things like that very well. I like to have at least those things very, very secure because it just gives you a good foundation. I don't want to be thinking about when my money is going to be coming in and things like that. So I've planned what was going to happen in the worst case scenario, that I don't get a job, that I don't find somewhere to live, that it all falls through. So at least having that backup plan and then working from that, I think that's improved my experience over here. Again, just connecting with people like online, seeing how other people have done things before. That's helped, I guess, ease my mind, so I know what to expect. And I think, yeah, if you're in your mid-20s and you don't have much responsibilities other than yourself, I definitely just encourage people to just put themselves out there to go and do things that they want to do, and just don't be afraid because of not having the information, because you can always find out how to do things. Use the resources that you have available. And yeah, I think with my work especially, just not being afraid to send those first few emails directly to the managers. You might get a no, but you have an equal chance of getting a yes as well. So you might as well just contact them directly and put yourself out there.
One of my mottos in life is, what's the worst that can happen? The worst in when you're applying for a job is that they'll say no. And the best is they might invite you for an interview. And even if you don't get the job after the interview, at least you'll have the experience of having been to an interview and you can see what sort of questions I ask. I'm not saying that's the best attitude to have for everything in life, because things can go bad. And so you have to be careful and you have to plan accordingly. But one of the other things that you mentioned, which was quite useful, is that speak to people. And we now live in a world where everyone is connected digitally. If you go on LinkedIn, there's thousands of people who have been through the process before you. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned. I enjoy technology and I'd always be fixing my computer. And whenever I ran into a problem, there's probably somebody else in this world who's already had that problem. And Google was my best friend, and YouTube as well. There's so much available on YouTube too. And one of the reasons for making this video particularly is because I'd get so many people asking me, I want to work in the UK as a biomedical scientist. How do I do it? And it's not something that I've been through. And so I thought I'd speak to people who'd actually been there, who've been through the process, who know the difficulties, the challenges that arise, and who can, share that wisdom that they've gained and the experience that they've gained. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today and helping me understand what it was like for you. And also this will hopefully help others too.
Yes, I definitely agree with you there. My first job in the lab was because of the girl that I met in my micro lab, and just speaking to her and asking her if her workplace had any jobs going, and that's how I landed my histo role. So definitely speak to people, make connections, because you never know. And I appreciate you having me on. I think what you have here is just very, very valuable, and I would have loved to have had something like this when I was looking to come over. So thank you.
Sure. So one last question before we call it quits. We've spoken about the past. What's your plan for the future?
Oh, that is a very good question. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. As much as I love working in the lab, I'm definitely looking for something a lot more challenging. I'm not interested in going to any managerial roles or quality roles. That's just not where my heart is. I very much like the very clinical interpretation side. That's something I'm figuring out, whether that's directly in the lab or just another role within the hospital. With our field and our experience, there are a lot of opportunities. I know some people go into medical instruments, working with like the diagnostic instrument providers to help set up the analyzers, and there are just so many roles that you can go into. So I'm exploring that at the moment, not too certain, but I'm excited for what will come, because I know there are a lot of things that I can potentially step into.
Yeah. Well, all the best for whatever you choose to do, and good luck with it all.
Thank you, Anna. So appreciate it.
No worries. Well, thank you for joining us. And I think unless you've got anything else to share or say, we can end the conversation here.
That's all. Thank you.
Perfect.